Hi, and welcome to my presentation on quick pickling. I'm going to go over a PowerPoint presentation that I have. This will be about a 45-minute presentation. Give me a minute while I pull up my PowerPoint. Okay, and my name is DWHITTEN. I'm the food and nutrition educator with Cornell Cooperative Extension in Saratoga County, New York. I am a certified master food preserver, and I also help to teach the master food preserver workshop in New York State that is done through Cornell University Cooperative Extension. What you'll be learning today is principles of pickling, safety considerations, ingredients I'll be going over, and some resources. So let's start with resources. For food preservation, for home food preservation, we'd like you to use the USDA National Center for Home Food Preservation as your go-to resource. And that is on the web at the address down there in red. And that is actually housed with the University of Georgia Cooperative Extension. So that's why it's a uga.edu website, or the easier way to get there is just to Google home food preservation, put in homefoodpreservation.net or .com. It will take you to their website. This is the home page of the National Center for Home Food Preservation. What I want to draw your attention to is this section down here that says, how do I? And today we're going to be talking about pickling. So if we clicked on that there, we would come to this page, how do I pickle? And there's some good general information about pickling. Most of the information I got from my presentation comes from the USDA source, selection of fresh cucumbers, other information, and then recipes, the cucumber pickles, other pickles, these are all recipes here. I also want you to know about my website, which is ccesaratoga.org. If you look under food and nutrition and food preservation, you'll come to this page where I do have a link to the National Center for Home Food Preservation. On the left-hand side, I have a bunch of videos. The first couple here are PowerPoint presentations like this that I have done in the past. And then I have other videos that are just really short, 3, 4, 5, 2-minute videos, just little clips. My presentations are a little more in-depth. And then on the right-hand side, you'll see all these fact sheets. There's lots of USDA or Cooperative Extension University fact sheets. These are some of the ones that I have found particularly well done. So I pulled those together on a website to make it easier for people to find some information. So when we're talking about canning in general, and pickles are going to be canned generally, the important musts are to use and follow directions from a reputable source. That would be like the USDA, National Center for Home Food Preservation, or the University of Georgia. So Easy to Preserve is a book that has pretty much all the information that is on the National Center for Home Food Preservation, and all the recipes are in their book. And I always make sure I have the latest version of that book. And then if you're searching on the web, and any recipe that you find that's from Cooperative Extension or has a .edu type website, you can be confident that it's going to be a reliable, safe recipe. The Ball Blue book has been around for decades, and the Ball Corporation also has tested their recipes that are in the Ball Blue book. So those are, we feel confident recommending those. But use up-to-date methods and information. With all the information that's out there on the internet, it's easy to find recipes from anybody. It might be from somebody's grandmother's method, but you want to be careful with those because they could potentially be unsafe. We have definitely seen unsafe recipes out on the internet. So how pickles preserve is that the high acid content in pickled food prevents the growth of bacteria, mold, and yeast that cause spoilage and illness. And the acidity comes from vinegar, sometimes lemon juice. Mostly vinegar is added to pickled foods to preserve them. And I just want to caution that the level of acidity in a pickled product is as important to its safety as it is to its taste and texture. So you do not want to alter the amount of vinegar or lemon juice or the amount of food or water in a recipe. It's all a researched different proportions of the vinegar to the food to the water. So if you change any of those things, you might end up with an unsafe recipe. Or you shouldn't use a vinegar with an unknown acidity. I'll be talking a little more about vinegar later. So use only recipes with tested proportions of ingredients. And so there must be a minimum uniform level of acid to prevent the growth of botulinum bacteria, which is a deadly bacteria. So when we're talking food safety here, we're talking about the potential of botulism growing in the food. So don't change do anything that would change the acidity of your recipe. Follow it carefully. There are different types of pickles. The fresh pack or quick process pickles are vegetables that are covered with a boiling hot vinegar, salt, and seasonings, what we call a pickling solution. And then the picture over here on the right is pickled cantaloupe. So you can make fruit pickles using whole or sliced fruits that are simmered in a spicy, sweet and sour syrup pickling solution. And the acidity of the fruit is increased by the addition of the vinegar or the lemon juice. And then there are relishes or chutneys, which are chopped vegetables or fruits that are cooked to desired consistency in a spicy vinegar pickling solution. And then fermented foods are also considered a form of pickling, where the acid builds up naturally over time during the fermentation process. But as opposed to the acid being vinegar, which is acetic acid, the acid in fermented foods is lactic acid. And lactic acid has a totally different flavor profile. That's why some people really prefer fermented dill pickles over quick dill pickles. I'm not going to be talking about fermented foods today. I did a whole presentation on fermented foods, fermenting vegetables, and that can be found on my website, ccesaratoga.org, is where you'll find that recording. Let's talk about the ingredients that you'll be using for pickling. Of course, you're going to start with your fresh produce, vegetables or fruit. You want to start with the best quality with no blemishes. And especially when it comes to cucumbers, there's an old adage that says 24 hours from vine to brine. So as fresh as possible, you want those cucumbers to be as fresh as possible when you pickle them. If you can't do it right away, then keep them in a cool place in your refrigerator, preferably. And always be careful with measuring and weighing the amounts of the produce according to the recipe. You're going to want to use firm pickling variety cucumbers for making pickles. If you're growing them yourself, you can look on the seed packet, and the seed packet will say whether or not they're recommended for pickling or not. Or if you're going to buy them at a farmer's market or at a farm stand, you can ask them if they are pickling variety of pickles, and they'll know what you're talking about. So for dill pickles, you want to choose relatively small pickles that are about 4 inches long. Or if you're doing the sweet gherkins, 1.5 inches. Large cucumbers can be sliced or cut into chunks or chips. The salad or waxed cucumbers that you might get at the grocery store, they shouldn't be used because they don't allow pickling solution to penetrate the skin. So if you do use them, you should slice them, but they generally don't make a good quality pickle. The flesh is soft and the skin is tough. When you're making pickles with cucumbers, there's one very important step you're going to want to do, and that is to cut 1/16 inch off the blossom end. This will reduce bacteria, molds, and enzymes that cause softening. Having a good crisp pickle is very important. That's a quality that people really like. Nobody likes a soft pickle. So when a lot of research has been done on this. The USDA still does research on food preservation, and they did a lot of research on how to keep a pickle crisp. And they found that by just cutting off that 16th inch off the blossom end, is all you need to do to keep your pickles crisp. Fruit, if you're using fruit in your pickle, then try to use slightly underripe fruit that will retain shape if you're pickling them whole or sliced. Vinegar, of course, is a very important ingredient in pickling, in the flavor of pickled products. And you can use either cider or white distilled vinegar. You want a vinegar that's between 4 and 6%. Usually the recipe will say 5%. They'll always say 5% vinegar. There's a little leeway there. It doesn't matter if it's over, it doesn't matter how much higher than 5% it is. It does become a problem if it's too low. And there are some vinegars on the market that are like 3% acidity. It is required by law that food manufacturers that make vinegar put the percent acidity on the label, so check the label. Never use homemade vinegar because that's an unknown acidity level. And vinegar is a functional safety ingredient, so don't ever dilute it by adding extra water to your pickle recipe. If your pickle solution is too tart for your taste, you can add sugar. So either cider or white distilled vinegar can be used. Cider vinegar has a mellower taste, but may discolor certain vegetables. The white distilled vinegar is made from grain and has a sharper taste. You can use some specialty vinegars if you'd like a white balsamic vinegar or a red wine vinegar or brown rice vinegar, as long as it has the proper acidity level between 4 and 6% acidity. Again, check the label for that. And these can affect the flavor, which might be a good thing and a desirable thing that you're looking for. Salt is another very important functional ingredient in making pickles. It does affect the texture and flavor. And of course, salt decreases the growth of spoilage organisms. Again, just like with the vinegar, you don't want to change the amount. Don't alter the amount of salt in a recipe. There are a lot of different salts on the market, but they're not all appropriate for pickling. So there is products that are called pickling and canning salts. A couple different companies make them. I'm not endorsing any company, any particular product as far as, I mean, these are all just plain salt, so it doesn't matter where you get it from. But what's different about pickling and canning salt is that it is pure salt. It has no iodine in it, which might discolor the product, and it has no anti-caking agents in it, and that might cause your brine to be cloudy. You may use regular table salt or sea salt, but just know that it could change the color. The iodine and the salt could affect the color. Other minerals in the sea salt could affect the color, or it could cause cloudiness. And then kosher salt can also be used, but this variety of kosher salt anyway does have an anti-caking agent in it. Another thing I want to say about kosher salt is that it is flaked, not ground like most salt is, so it measures differently. A tablespoon of kosher salt is actually less salt than a tablespoon of ground salt. So if you do insist on using kosher salt, then you'll have to weigh it to get the equivalent amount. You can find conversion charts online about how to convert kosher salt to regular ground salt as far as measuring goes. And it could be up to a third to a half increase in volume, actually. The USDA does have recipes for reduced salt pickles, if that's what you want. You look for a recipe specifically made for reduced salt pickles. They do have more vinegar in them, so they'll have a little more of acidic taste. And the texture is different too. Make sure you follow the recipe exactly. And you might want to make a smaller batch if it's the first time you're making the reduced salt pickles to see if you really like them, because they are different texture and flavor. Herbs and spices are also ingredients in making pickles. Spices and herbs can be substituted for each other. So if a recipe calls for oregano and you don't like oregano and you want to substitute something else in there, you can do that. And you can reduce the amount of total herbs and spices that are in the recipe, but don't increase the amount because that could be a safety concern. And you'll want to use whole spices unless the recipe calls for ground spices. Dill is one of the popular herbs that's used in making pickles, especially the fresh dill pickles. And so you want to use a lot of times it'll call for a flower. It'll call for, I don't know, 14 dill flowers. So you want to pick the flowers as soon as they begin to open. Don't use older flowers where the blossoms are already gone. If you don't have the dill flower, you can substitute the seed for the fresh dill. So 3 dill heads would be equivalent to like 1 dill seed. If spices are to be removed from pickles before they're put in the jar, you can tie them loosely in a thin, clean square of cheesecloth. And then you would boil your vinegar and water and salt, and you would have your spices in there. And then before you add that hot liquid to your vegetables in the jar, you could just remove the cheesecloth and get rid of your spices. Or if you don't have cheesecloth, you could also use a stainless steel tea ball for holding your spices. Blue garlic. I'm mentioning this not because you should be using blue garlic, but a lot of recipes call for garlic, and you might want to use garlic in your recipes. Well, we get people calling us at Cooperative Extension very concerned because the garlic that's in their pickled products has turned blue, and they are wondering if it is okay to eat it and what happened. And actually, I can assure you it is not a safety concern. It's perfectly fine. Immature or very old garlic may turn pink or bluish purple in reaction to the acid. So it's not a concern, but I just wanted to point that out. Other ingredients you'll be using in making pickles is the water. And the only problem you might have is if you have a really hard water, especially if it has iron in it, it could discolor your pickles. Sugar, a lot of times there's a sweet pickle recipe. So it adds flavor, but it also helps to plump the pickles. You can use either white or brown sugar. Honey can replace the sugar, but use 1/4 less since it's sweeter than sugar. And if you want to make a pickle with a non-nutritive sweetener, look for a recipe that was developed by the manufacturer. Some non-nutritive sweeteners break down in heat and will get a really bitter flavor. I want to talk about firming agents, not because they're needed, because actually you do not need firming agents if you have fresh, good quality produce and you're using up-to-date procedures. And of course, one of the important up-to-date procedures is to cut that 1/16 inch off the blossom end. Remember, I said that keeps the cucumbers from softening. So a firming agent is something that will keep your cucumbers from softening. So the best thing you can do, the only thing you really need to do is cut that 1/16 inch off. But there are firming agents on the market and people ask me about them. So I just wanted to go over these. Again, I'm not recommending them, they're not necessary. But Pickle Crisp is a ball product that you've probably seen if you've shopped for food preservation ingredients. And that will help to firm up your pickles in a quick pickle recipe. Alum is another thing that has been called for, especially in fermented pickles. It really does not improve firmness of quick pickles, which is what we're talking about today. And then there's lime, there's pickling lime, which is a food grade lime. It can be unsafe. You don't want to consume too much of this lime. And so if it's not done correctly, it could be a food safety issue. The directions usually call for making a solution with the lime and then soaking your pickles in that for 12 to 24 hours. But then you have to soak out the extra lime, which is quite a process. After you drain it from the line, you would put it in fresh water and let it soak for a couple of hours. Drain it again, let it soak in fresh water for an hour or two more. Drain it again and let it soak again. So it's quite a process. And again, as I said, it's really not needed. Some old time recipes might have called for grape leaves. And again, that's because the leaves have a certain substance in them that inhibits the enzyme that can cause softening. Okay, that's all I'm going to say about firming agents, but there is one more thing that you could do to improve firmness of your pickles, and that is the low temperature pasteurization method. So instead of processing your pickles in a boiling water canner, you're going to process them for 30 minutes in water at 180 degrees. It has to be at least 180 degrees for 30 minutes. So you're going to want to use a thermometer because, you know, boiling water, you can tell when boiling water is boiling, right? How do you know if your water's at 180 degrees or more? You need to use the thermometer. But by applying less heat to the pickles, it does improve the firmness. I did want to mention refrigerator pickles. Refrigerator pickles are not processed in the boiling water bath. As the name implies, after you make them, you store them in the refrigerator. Acidity is really not a big safety factor with refrigerated pickles because they're not going to be canned, they're going to be stored in the refrigerator. We don't have to worry about botulism, so a lot of times refrigerated pickles have less acid in them, less vinegar in them than a regular pickle recipe. So refrigerated pickle recipes should not be canned. If you find a great refrigerator pickle recipe and you really like it and you think you want to can it to make it so you can fill your shelves with it, don't do it. It could be a serious food safety issue leading to botulism and botulism food poisoning. The USDA does not have any recipes for refrigerated pickles. What I have a picture of here is a refrigerator pickled beets and onions, and that recipe can be found on Ball, their fresh preserving website, the Ball website. Or if you go online, there's tons of refrigerator pickle recipes. But just remember, if you're going to make a refrigerator pickle recipe, put it in the refrigerator, do not can it. So for quick pickling, also called fresh pack procedures, first of all, of course, follow a reliable, safe recipe. Some recipes call for soaking the vegetables in ice water to improve the texture, or soaking them overnight in a brine, also meant to improve the texture. I wanted to take some time to go over a couple of different recipes because there's some variation in pickles. So we'll look at one cucumber pickle recipe, some other what's categorized as other vegetable pickles, and then relish. So this is the quick fresh pack dill pickles. For this, you're going to want 8 pounds of pickling cucumbers, 2 gallons of water, and pickling salt. And you want your vinegar, sugar, just a little bit of sugar in this one. The more water, because this pickling salt and water, 2 gallons of water, and the pickling salt is what you're using to soak your pickles in. And then you would drain them and put them in the jar. And then after the rest of these ingredients, you're going to, the vinegar, the sugar, and the water, you're going to bring to a boil, and your pickling spices bring to a boil. The whole mustard seed and the dill or dill seed is going to be added to each jar individually. And then you'll put your pickles, put the cucumbers in and pour the hot solution over. So, and as you see from these directions, it starts with telling you to cut 1/16 inch off the blossom end of your cucumbers. Dissolve the salt in the water and pour over the cucumbers and let them stand for 12 hours. And then drain that, combine your vinegar, salt, and sugar and water, and your pickling spices, and heat that to boiling. Then fill your jars with the cucumbers, add the mustard seed and fresh dill, and then cover with the boiling pickle solution, leaving 1/2 inch headspace. And then pickles are processed, and because they are a high acid food, because there's so much vinegar added, that they can be processed in a boiling water canner or a steam canner. If you don't know how to use these and don't know anything, if you haven't done canning before, one of the presentations I did recently that is on our website was an introduction to home canning. And you can review that if you want, or go to the National Center for Home Food Preservation for directions on using canners. So after you've put them in the jar and put the lids on, you're going to process them. You can either use the low temperature pasteurization treatment method, or if you were doing it in a boiling water canner or a steam canner, you would process pints for 10 minutes or quarts for 15 minutes. And that's if you're under 1,000-foot elevation. When you're canning, if you're, they'll always give you different processing times when you're doing boiling water canning or steam canning, depending on your altitude. So you do have to adjust the processing time if you're over 1,000 feet. All right, let's look at other vegetable recipes. Dilly beans. This one I do in my food preservation classes and everybody loves it. One woman told me that she brought the dilly beans home and her young son ate the entire jar. He just loved it. And the dilly beans are actually put in the jar raw, just like the cucumbers are put in the jar raw, and then you make your pickling solution and pour them over. The pickled carrots, those are, the carrots, because they are a harder vegetable, those are cooked a little bit in the pickling line, or the pickling solution. The marinated peppers, this is a picture of marinated peppers here, and this is one of my favorite recipes. We make this in my classes too, and it's an unusual recipe because it has oil in it. So this is the recipe for the marinated peppers. It includes, you can use whatever peppers you want, sweet peppers or hot peppers or any combination thereof, as long as you have just 4 pounds of peppers. And then this includes lemon juice, which is kind of unusual for a pickle recipe. Most of them don't have lemon juice, but it adds a nice flavor. In addition to the white vinegar, some oregano leaves, and then a cup of olive or other salad oil, onion, and then optional garlic or horseradish. The peppers are slightly cooked to loosen the skin. There's a couple of different methods you can use to do that, and so that you can peel the peppers. If you don't want to go through the process of peeling the peppers, you don't have to do that, but they would be at least blanched to soften them up a little bit. And then you'll mix all the remaining ingredients in a saucepan and heat that. And then if you're using the garlic and the horseradish and salt, you would add that individually to each jar and then fill it with peppers and then pour the hot pickling solution over that, leaving a 1/2 inch headspace. A word of caution if you're making these is to be careful not to get any oil on the sealing surface, because that oil on the sealing surface will cause, prevent your lids from sealing to your jar. So use a funnel, wipe the rim thoroughly before you put the lid on. And then of course you're going to process that in a boiling water canner. These are 1/2 pints and pints for 15 minutes. Here's a relish recipe that I came upon as I was looking at recipes for this presentation. I'd never heard of this one before, and I wanted to use this because this is an example of using fruit in a pickled product. So this calls for 8 cups of chopped peaches, plus ripe tomatoes, green sweet peppers, a little bit of red hot pepper, onion, brown sugar, quite a bit of brown sugar, so this is a sweet relish, 2 cups of vinegar, and then some salt, and 4 tablespoons of pickling spice. So you're going to peel and pick the peaches, chop them into small pieces, peel and chop the tomatoes, dice the peppers, peel the onions and grind them in a food processor, and then grind the hot pepper, which can be a problem sometimes, because sometimes when you're growing peppers, the hot oils from the pepper get into the air, and then they could get into your eyes and cause a problem. So if you don't want to deal with hot peppers, the recipe for this does suggest that you could use Tabasco sauce as a replacement and add it to your taste. I suppose you could use any hot sauce, your favorite hot sauce, and add it to taste. And then combine all the ingredients in a 10-quart saucepan, cook and stir about 1.5 to 2 hours, which is really unusual for a pickle recipe for it to cook that long, or until it reaches the desired thickness, and then pack into hot jars and leaving 1/2 inch of headspace. And then again, you're going to process those in a boiling water canner. The pints would be processed for 10 minutes. Unless you're over 1,000 feet, then you would adjust for your altitude. So now that you've made your pickles, you're going to need to store your ingredient or store your product. So store it in a cool, dark space with the ring bands removed. The picture here on the right is one of my master food preserver volunteers. This is her basement where she stores all her canned goods. She doesn't necessarily have all of the jars labeled, which we recommend labeling. Jars, put what's in the product and the date, so that you know how long it's been there. But she does have, she has labels on her shelf here. And I know Donna is very organized, so she keeps track and rotates her products every year, but she makes a ton of canned products, including lots of pickled products. So, and then pickles do taste better after they've sat for a couple of weeks, given all the ingredients time to meld together. So give them a couple of weeks before you try them, and then enjoy them within a year. We say that with all home food preserved products, that you should use them within a year for best quality. And thank you for attending my presentation. These are a list of the sources that I used: the National Center for Home Food Preservation and the Master Food Preserver Manual, and the USDA Complete Guide to Home Canning. Again, my name is DIANE WHITTEN. Feel free to contact me anytime at dwihitten@cornell.edu. And please don't forget about our website, where you can find other videos like this. Thank you very much for attending.